All right, this is the seventh and last recording of the Water is the Medium of Life lecture. And so let's talk about some other things associated with water. One is flooding. And so one of the problems we have is human activity obviously contributes to it. We have narrowed, channeled, and dammed lots of our rivers. And when we do that, we often remove vegetation, which actually traps water. So that is now running quicker. We've also drained many of our wetlands. Only about 10% of our wetlands, actually that number might be closer to 5 now, 5% exist still here in California. We filled them in and built houses on them. So all of these waters would be trapped, and now what's happening is we're making out the ocean, so we got sea levels rising and what we call floodplains, the area adjacent to streams or whatever. Now, unfortunately, will overflow, and if we build houses and things right up to it, those are obviously in danger. And then water pollution. There's the best. Okay, so here's what I want you to know: the best way to reduce water pollution is to prevent it. It is hard to fix. It's easier to stop. And there are two types. There is point and non-point pollution. Point pollution is where you can see it, and that would be like a picture on the right. Here's a pipe, things are coming out. You can see some eutrophication going on. That is a point source. Non-point would be from a diffuse area where I've got a river and I can see a bunch of plastics or trash. And I might not be able to tell directly. There's no one pipe. It's coming in from lots of different sources, and that would be the non-point. The leading causes of water pollution today is really agriculture and industry and mining. Those three things. We can do our parts, runoff from our cars and from our houses, if we litter the trash. But most of it still is coming from agricultural activities, industrial facilities, and mining. All right, stream and river pollution. It can actually recover rapidly because the water is moving. Riparian areas or moving water are a great way to filter. And so in 1970s, we put out laws to try to stop these point source pollution issues from industry. Unfortunately, the discharge 80 or 90% of water that does make our streams and lakes are not treated in any way. And that becomes a major, major problem. We'll talk about treatment at the end here. Lakes, because the water doesn't move, lakes and reservoirs, unfortunately, are less effective on cleaning. They have typically stratified layers. So what that means is that certain layers can be highly contaminated. And naturally, again, we have this eutrophication where the conditions are just right, and you'll have this bloom of phytoplankton. But now we're getting what we call cultural eutrophication, which is because of our man-made fertilizers, which again, there are phosphates and nitrates, and we end up with these dead zones that we talked about. All right, so Vogel principle: lakes, swamps, marshes, and bogs function as nutrient traps, and because they do that, again, they are highly susceptible to cultural eutrophication. Okay, so lakes, swamps, marshes, and bogs function as nutrient traps. This is basically kind of a low point where all the nutrients go. So I want you to know that principle. All right, drinking water. We in the United States has the Safe Drinking Water Act of 1975, and then we upgraded it in 96. And we have standards. The EPA can, watches you to do that, and hopefully you have watched TAPT, and we will talk about that when we see each other again, maybe before you see these videos. So we're going to talk about, is water, bottled water, a safe alternative? And then we have a very simple thing. You see some people right here, and they are using something called a life straw. And these are a filter, and this was invented. They're fairly cheap, and this is a way to minimize pollutants in the water. And so they're called life straws. And I actually have a couple in my office. If all hell broke loose and I was at school, I've got the wildlife sanctuary to survive on. And I have a couple of life straws. And you can go to REI and buy HEPA filters if you're a backpacker. And those are filters that allow you to drink stream water, and they do kind of the same thing, but life straws were invented and they're very cheap, very easy. The military has a version. I actually have a military version in my office. One of my former students was a vet, and he had several. And it's funny because not as pretty. The military one is not as pretty, but is just as functional. So very good. Very good idea for people in countries that don't have a lot of money and don't have access to clean water. We saw those numbers from a previous slide, previous video. Okay, many humans treat the ocean as a dumping site. 80% of marine pollution starts on land. And again, 80 to 90% of municipal, and municipal means city sewage, from coastal areas of less developed countries is dumped directly into the ocean. Here in California, most of it gets through our sewage treatment plants. Coastal wetlands are key links between terrestrial and marine environments. So I do want you to know that principle. And unfortunately, we live in a coastal wetland area. And so the whole coast of California was a coastal wetland until we built on it. And so we still have this interchange. All right, so our last slide here will be sewage treatment. In areas that are small and rural, often there are septic tanks. And what that means is your water directly does not go into a sewer. It goes into a tank that's buried somewhere on your property. And that then filters out the solids and lets the water treat. And there's what they call a leach field, where the water goes down and leaches out into your property, and it replenishes the groundwater, and it's very functional. And on you will have to have the septic tank pumped every once in a while, and you also have to be careful on what's put in the tank. There's bacteria in there to break things down, and so hard chemicals going down your sink could kill that bacteria and cause septic tank problems. Most of us are on a sewer system now, and there's primary treatment and secondary treatment, and the lab actually goes and looks at a water treatment plant. Primary sewage treatment would be physical. You're using some kind of leach field, or you're using some kind of screening to catch the big parts. The secondary sewage is biological. That is when they're dropping bacteria and using some kind of purifying system. Our water then is, we add chlorine to our water, which is actually a little controversial. It makes water look like water, and it disinfects what's in there. You go to a water treatment plant, they show you the sewage going in, and then they show you the water coming out. The water coming out is drinkable. The problem is mental. It is one of those things that we have been taught that it's nasty. I'm not quite sure why we have to have a lot of water to flush down our urine and waste. They're composting toilets that basically don't use any water, and they're safe, and they can be odorless. But again, that's not how we're taught. And so as populations increase and water becomes an issue, these may be things that we have to think about. And can we, one of the problems with chlorine can react, and we get hydrocarbons, which are known carcinogens. And so there is some question about chlorinating the water. It does kill some of the waterborne diseases, but long-term use could increase the chances of cancers. And with that, that would be the end of the water lectures.